Thank you very much for coming and celebrating today, this wonderful event. There are some days, though, I feel rather frustrated about the whole issue of the Constitution, because if you believe strongly in the rule of law, the Constitution should mean something. And we've lived a long time where we've sent too many people to Washington who didn't care all that much about the Constitution. I think that ought to change. You know, it's real easy to blame those in Washington for the neglect of the Constitution. When you think what the presidents do and how many things they do that are unconstitutional, they write executive orders and signing statements, they go to war, they write regulations, and it's just totally out of control. As well as the judicial branch. They're supposed to judge the law, but they write law quite frequently too. What does the Congress do? The Congress, do they live up to their oath of office and do the things they're supposed to do and be responsible? No, they're always too anxious to do something that's not in the Constitution. The things they're supposed to do, they allow somebody else to do. So there's been a lot of neglect in Washington to protect the Constitution. There's plenty of blame to go around. You know, are we going to pick the Congress or the courts or the executive branch for the greatest abuse of our Constitution? I don't think we can limit it to there. And I think we, as a people, have some of the responsibility too. Because what happened was, even though the Constitution, though imperfect, was written and designed to try to restrain the federal government. There's a lot of thou shalt nots in there. It was never meant to restrain you, it was meant to restrain the federal government. That is the first thing. After the signing of the document, Franklin said, when he was asked what he had, he said, well, we're giving you a republic if we can keep it. Unfortunately, we are on the last legs of our republic unless we really wake up and do something about it. And it isn't going to be, once again, saying, well, they better do something up in Washington. It has to be done at the grassroots. We lost a lot of our constitutional rights because of the complacency of the people. People either just said, I'm not worried about it, I'm doing fine, and we're getting along quite well. Or the people took the position that they wanted special privileges. They figured, well, if we have a government that will take care of us from cradle to grave, and they march off and do all these wonderful things around the world, we're not going to care about it. But something dramatically has changed here in the last several years. I've often said that the real question that we have to ask as a people is, what should the role of government be? And the founders, those who resented the king and decided that they didn't like the abuse of the king, they asked the same question, what should the role of government be? And they did not like the role the king was playing. So there was first an intellectual revolution that led then to a very violent revolution, and we got our independence. But some of the strongest motivation for the Constitutional Convention had to do with two major issues. One issue was the trade among the states, and there were a lot of restrictions. And the other big issue was that every state had a different currency, and too often they were just printing the money. And this was very cumbersome. The economy wasn't doing all that great after the Declaration of Independence and up until the Constitution, because of this disagreement about what should be done. So that was what was supposed to be done, just to correct these two problems. And some argued that they went too far and they developed a whole new system that generally led itself be known that it could be diluted. Others said that others were anxious to have a much stronger national government. But they did address the two major issues. One was the money issue. So that is why when we have in the Constitution very clearly the issue of money is dealt with, and in the Constitution it is directly said that nobody in the government cannot emit bills of credit, which is paper money. So I would say if you really understood that and understood the provision in there that says that only gold and silver can be used as legal tender, and also the understanding that there is no explicit authorization to start a central bank, the conclusion is we should have hard money and no Federal Reserve System. And to deal with the problem of interstate commerce, because they did not want to have tariffs among the states and prohibition of trade, So they said that they wrote the Interstate Commerce Clause, which was designed to make sure that people and goods and services could flow across the border. There should be no inhibition. But unfortunately, whether it was the monetary issue, which has been grossly abused, or the Interstate Commerce Clause has been abused, because now, for the past 100 years or so, they've used the Interstate Commerce Clause not to make sure there's free flow of goods and services, but to use it to regulate what is going back and forth through the state. Not only that, they've gone to such an extreme to use the Interstate Commerce Clause to regulate those things that are interstate, made in a state and sold in a state, and they justify and they say, well, if you make it in your state and you sell it in your state, you might affect somebody else's production and sales in another state, so therefore it's interstate, and therefore they can regulate anything at all. So we have drifted so far from the original intent of the Constitution, whether it's the monetary issue or the interstate clause. But then again, we have drifted so far away with the executive branch. You know, technically it's unconstitutional to write regulations. Only the Congress is allowed to write the law, and regulations are the law. And yet we have been complacent with that for 100 years or so. At least we started off pretty well. The executive branch was not writing the regulations. But today they write regulations wholesale and they become the law of the land. Congress passes a law, they send it, and then the executive branch creates the bureaucracy, and then they go and write numerous regulations, and technically they are not constitutional. Sure, the President has constitutional authority to write executive orders, to do only those things he's constitutionally authorized to do. So if he's the commander-in-chief, he can write an executive order to direct the troops and fulfill his responsibility as being the President. But he doesn't have this authority to write just any executive order and make it a law. We're in a crisis in this country today because there's so little respect for the rule of law. We've gotten to a point where the people have allowed the government to do so much. We go to war without declarations. They print the money without authority. They write laws without authority. And now there's essentially no respect for the Constitution at all. And if we don't restore that, I'm afraid that we're in for a lot more trouble. We're in enough trouble now. But it is this lack of respect for the Constitution. Sometimes these things that come up and the government does, and we get tired of it, we know they're inefficient. If they technically were really productive at it, let's say that the federal government got involved in education, the quality of education skyrocketed, we got twice the benefits and with half the money, you'd say, boy, I'll tell you what, we really need the federal government in education. But we don't have that much. We don't need to discuss that because there aren't very many things that I can find anything that the government, the federal government, can do better than the local government, so we don't have to deal with that. There's no authority for the government to be running our public school system. So therefore, there's no constitutional authority to have a Department of Education, and we should actually get rid of the Department of Education. In D.C., for instance, the education there, like I said, is under the jurisdiction of the federal government. And they get a lot of money per student. Now, do we have any homeschoolers in this audience? Yeah, we have a few. So you'll identify with this a little bit. Because homeschooling can be done, and they're known to be pretty efficient. We understand homeschoolers get a pretty darn good education. And it costs a lot less money. Well, the extreme opposite of getting an education at home when the conditions are permissible, if you compare that cost to the cost of educating a child in District of Columbia, they get $17,000 a year per student in D.C., and every year the people who run the schools in D.C. come and they beg and plead and they say, we have a mess here. I mean, we can't do anything. We need more money. And of course they end up with more money and quality goes down and they have that all that mess. And when you do try to clean it up, there's some really angry people. Now the government has been involved in medicine for 40 years or so. I actually, when I started practicing medicine out of medical school, the federal government was essentially not involved. It was before Medicare and Medicaid, and you know, the truth is, it did pretty well. The costs were so low. The bureaucracy wasn't there. There were no corporations that were making a lot of profits. Now the corporations are very much involved, whether it's the drug companies or insurance companies or management companies. So they're the ones who get involved in making a lot of profits. But generally speaking, though, when the government gets involved, quality goes down and costs go up. For those of us who advocate a strict adherence to the Constitution, and we will be moving in that direction because the other direction is just downhill, so I suspect we will be, but we can't assume that it's going to be perfectly smooth sailing, because there's still a lot of people who are very dependent on the transfer of wealth from one group to another group, and therefore they have switched the definition of what rights are. The federal government and the Constitution was there to defend our rights. Our rights come from our Creator. They're natural to us. We should have a right to our life. We should have a right to our liberties. And we should have a right to keep what we earn. And under those conditions, of course, the original intent of the Constitution was written that under those conditions, you wouldn't have an income tax and you wouldn't have the IRS. And I would think that would be very nice. But as the corrections are made, and we won't have any choice about it, the choices will be made because eventually economic laws always rule stronger than politicians. The Federal Reserve is powerful, politicians are powerful, the Congress can tax and spend and all. But eventually there are limits, and that is what the problem is today. We have not followed the rule of law, we have not followed our Constitution, and unfortunately the world has been very tolerant of us because they have allowed us to print the universal currency, the reserve currency of the world. We shouldn't have been doing it for ourselves, but they should have been smart enough not to take these currencies, but they have. And this is worldwide. So the dollar phenomenon and the overprinting of dollars around the world is one of the reasons why there's a crisis in Europe today. And when a country gets to the point where they can't finance their debt anymore, like Greece, I mean, there's people who get very, very angry and upset. So this is likely to happen here if we're not prepared and we can't do this in a good manner. And that is, we should work our way out of this problem. And we should be able to follow the rules. I've claimed all along that our problems are very vivid and they're here for a very special reason. I think almost all our problems come from the fact that we have been careless about what our politicians have done, and we haven't followed our Constitution. If that is the case, why wouldn't most of our answers be found in just making sure that we do follow the Constitution? That's where our solution should be found. In our Constitution, there is it's very clear that the states could not handle national defense, and they were careful to say that was a prime responsibility of the federal government, and I think that is the case. And we should have a strong military. But there is nothing in the Constitution that says that we are supposed to go around the world and pretend that we know what is best for everybody, that we become the policemen of the world, we become nation builders. We're in about 140 countries. We have 900 bases around the world. And right now, even with the attempt to get control of things in Washington, there's no serious attempt to change that policy. It's a strong bipartisan policy, and they have it such that if you don't support it and you claim, well, I don't support it because I think we could have a stronger national defense, I believe it's a part of the Constitution. No, they twist it around and they say, oh no, you don't care about America, you are unpatriotic, and therefore there's essentially no resistance to this. But we've had some pretty good presidents that warned us about that, namely Eisenhower. Ike said that you should be cautious. If you keep doing this and pretending you can police the world, all you're going to do is be subsidizing the military-industrial complex. And I think that's where we are today. It is hard to believe that we've gotten to a point with this abuse and ignoring the Constitution where military spending is a more sacred cow than some of the domestic spending for health care. And so the priorities are all mixed up, but something will have to give. It happened with the Soviet system. They went and they spent too much, extended themselves, they went bankrupt. and their system broke down. And our system will probably break down because of this refusal to live up to the law of the land and live within the rule of law. So therefore, those of us who are interested in the Constitution, like all of you are, to continue to study this and to be prepared, because the answers are there. We're in better shape than the Soviets were. When the Soviets broke down, the Russian system did not have our traditions. We've had this great tradition. We believed in individual liberty and self-reliance and property rights and contracts rights and sound property. And we had at one time the whole idea of a different foreign policy. So we don't have to reinvent it. We can improve on what we knew, but we have a great tradition. But it won't come automatically. The Constitution will not be restored by just saying, oh, it's going to break down, it's going to be a mess, and all of a sudden we're going to have a bunch of people up there and they're going to wake up and do the right thing. They're not going to do that. The only way the people in Washington will wake up and decide they ought to follow the Constitution is when the people at the grassroots level sends a strong message to them and tell them this is the way you ought to do it or you're not going to get reelected. There's a lot of people here that don't understand that you have a right to your life and your liberty, you have a right to work and be able to keep what you earn, because right now entitlements have become rights. Oh, I'm entitled to this, I have a right to this, and when it's not forthcoming, they're going to be very unhappy. Now, most of the entitlement system was developed out of this idea that we need to take care of the people who need help. And there's a lot who are deceitful, but most of the people in Washington actually are motivated by wanting to help the people who are having problems. And I recognize that. The whole thing is a failed philosophy, because a little bit of that leads to a whole lot, and then the people, once you get into the entitlement business, it's designed to help the poor. Guess who get the benefits from the entitlements? The rich get the benefits, the banks get the bailout, the corporations get their bailout, and the poor, what happens in like this housing bubble bursting? You were responsible for bailing out the taxpayer, and through the weakening of the dollar and the Fed, we bailed these people out. And what happened to many in the middle class, and they're continuing to suffer, is they lose their jobs and they lose their houses. So all these benefits, you say, well, it's the government that has to give everybody a house and make sure everybody can get a house, and actually very much fails and helps them very well. This whole notion that we have to succumb to the idea that, well, if we don't give in and say, oh yes, welfareism is good to a degree and we have to concede this. I say if you concede a little bit, you concede 100% of the principle, and that principle then is distorted and people take advantage of it, and now we are meeting this challenge. We have to not only study our Constitution, understand why the founders understood property rights and individual liberty, but we also have to have a rebirth of this idea of freedom. We as a people actually have lost confidence, because we keep saying, oh well, that sounds good, but we still have to be an ABC country because they need our help, or what would happen if we weren't there? And others say, well, if we don't do this for group A, B, and C, they're going to have terrible, terrible trouble. So we've lost confidence and lost an understanding, and we concede too much to the authoritarians who are always going to take care of us. And it will not be easy. They would like not to give up any of their power. So you can just already see we have made some inroads into this whole idea of looking at the Federal Reserve and having audits of the Federal Reserve. And they are not going to concede that power. Just think of the ominous power if you have control of the printing presses. You're the official counterfeiters. And this will not happen easily. But where the real excitement is where I used to go around the country and talk to so many people. There's a lot of people waking up. And, the Tea Party movement is very amorphous. It's not, all one group, and there are different views, but still it's very, very healthy, because basically Tea Party people are talking about the government is too big, they spend too much money, and the debt is too big. And this is very, very good. But I go to a lot of universities, and young people are excited about the ideas of liberty. They do understand that they're getting a bum rap. They're inheriting a system that endless wars and endless spending, endless debt, and they're understanding this. The fact that college students, even though their professors might not be teaching it, they are studying the ideas of money and the Federal Reserve. So there's a lot of reason to be encouraged. And the fact that we have a great tradition, and there's so many of you around the country who have not forgotten, still know the importance of the Constitution and the concept of liberty. So I congratulate you for coming and sharing a day on this issue, and believe me, a lot can be restored and a lot of good can come from the fact of you just emphasizing the rule of law and making sure all our politicians obey the Constitution. Thank you very much.